Aloha once again, friends and family. I'm going to talk today about Atlantean teaching. That kind of goes in line with some of what I've been talking about. The way I understand it is that when we were yet angelic beings, some of us decided to manifest into physicality, become physical. And these ones that did this became known as Manimals, or what I'm guessing is humans. And they were part animal, part human. But because they had lowered their frequency to such a degree and so quickly, that separated them from their universal consciousness or God consciousness. And so I would surmise for the first time we had beings of a higher nature that saw themselves as separate. I mean, they probably didn't see themselves as separate because their consciousness had fallen to a degree that they didn't even know. But to those that were still in angelic form or higher density form, realized what had happened. And so some of the angelics decided that in order to try to help those, let us just say fallen ones, recover their consciousness, that they too were going to manifest into physicality. And that they basically chose ape-like, ape-ish human forms, mainly because it allowed them to manipulate the world of physicality with the greatest of ease. I mean, it would be much easier to manipulate physicality as an ape than it would if you were a tortoise. And so and I would guess also that some of these folks are what became known as Bigfoot in our modern times. And so this was done, but some of them also succumbed to, let us just simplify it and say, selfishness or selfish desire. And they became known as the Belialians, which I would also guess that that has something to do with the ones that we say in modern times are of Baal. So part of them became Belialians, and part of them remained or became known as the children of the law of one. And the goal has been since day one to try to restore those who had forgotten, let us say, their origins, forgot where they actually came from, forgot who they actually were. And so they, in essence, started what, again, to us in the common era, modern times, know as religion, the first religion. But see, religion was something completely different back then than it is now. Religion didn't even exist then, so we couldn't really say they were a religion. But looking at it from our vantage point, we would say that it's a religion. But religion, in its pure form, in its pure purpose, would not be seen as a bad thing. But because everything has gotten so distorted here, we now see religion as something bad. And they had a very structured order. They passed on their knowledge through oral tradition. They had what we would call, priests and the whole thing. But it wasn't defiled. It wasn't corrupted. It was pure. And its motivation was service to other or universal love. So, if we can understand this, it really gives a new perspective on religion and priesthood and that whole thing. But anyway, these Manimals eventually died, but like all spirits that have come into physicality, reincarnate. Because until we get back home, so to speak, or until we get back to our former state, that is what we do. And it's a learning process, and it's nothing wrong with that at all. But it became entrapment to a degree, well, to a huge degree now, because if you dupe everybody in physicality, if you distort every teaching for all those in physicality, then you really have trapped them in a cycle that we could think of it as being endless, because who knows when it's going to end. Like, how are these people going to come back to the truth? How are they going to wake up? if everything's distorted, if everything is corrupted. So these Manimals, as well as, the first wave of angelics that became physical beings, like I said, half human, half animal, they were the first wave of ones that did this. And then the second wave we could consider is those that decided to, let us say, go after them, to also descend into physicality in order to try to help them regain who they were. And so both of these groups have been reincarnating. And of course, some of the children of the Law of One group, some of them have ascended and gone back home. But the Manimals and the Belial group became the corrupted leaders of the world, we could say. And so over the course of time, the refinement of, let us say, humans obviously became less animal-like. Probably took longer for the Manimals because they were literally half animal. And probably took less time for the Belial group. So my hypothesis, or I guess is that the Manimal reincarnated ones perhaps still look very beastly, and so they stay out of the scrutinizing eye. Whereas the Belial group look more human. And so they are the ones you see in the public eye. They're the ones you see, that the people in the Matrix call their leaders. And they're doing the bidding of the Manimals, or the Manimal type. And so when we think of reptilians and the like, I think what we're really understanding is that they are from these two groups. And you can sense that these people don't have souls in the way that you can sense that people of love, unity, and light have souls, or the children of the Law of One have souls. You can look at these people, you can look into these people's eyes, and just for an example, like somebody like Nancy Pelosi and George Soros and these types of people, you can sense that there is a creature lurking just below the surface of their skin. They're not fully human. And maybe we could say they're not at all man. They're not, I'm not talking about gender, but they're not man. They're cut off from emotion, and they're in a very low, dense state of consciousness. And they're willing to do all manner of evil. And so I guess the battle on earth has been, that's the battle, is trying to get these fallen ones' consciousness to come back to them, to remove their amnesia of where they came from originally. And this, I guess, to a degree, is all of our battles here. Even if you're of the children of the law of one, we all seem to deal with this amnesia and this lowered state of consciousness that does not allow us to perceive hardly anything the way that we could say it actually is, or we could say the way that it alternatively is, because virtually nothing here is set in stone, although we've been taught to think that way and to think that it is very just set, and nobody can alter any of it. Yet that's not true at all. But in your lowered state of consciousness, in duality, in separation, yes, that's true. But if we get back to our former state, or on the way back to our former state, we begin to learn, and as our consciousness expands yet more and more as the days go by, for the true seekers, for the ones truly seeking to manifest home again, or a world or an environment that is much more like home than this, what we think of as this world, and what it became. So just a side note here that's I found very interesting, but there was, I'm not going to get the names and all that. I'm not here to try to go into all that. I'm just trying to give you the meat of the matter. So there were some researchers that went to Tibet to study some monks. Let's just leave it at that. And in the course of their, and mind you, they were all skeptics, not, let us say, believers. And by the time they were done with their sojourn, their lives were transformed forever. But in the course of one of the teachings, let us say one of the head monks was explaining how some of the early men, so I'm taking this to be the children of the law of one, and or the Belialians, had the power. Basically, they still possessed or retained a lot of their powers of manifestation, which has slowly been degraded, and through deceptive teachings and lots of doubt and the corruption of religion, as I talked about, these things slowly faded away from us, even though they're still there and they're still available. We just don't tap into them because, firstly, we just don't even believe it. But at that time, they still had access to all that because they were freshly departed from the higher realm, and they could make, either out of clay or out of stone or probably anything, they could create forms, probably human or beast, and they could breathe life into the forms, and the forms would animate and become living beings. And he demonstrated this to them by making a clay figure that was about 6 inches high and animating it and setting it on the table, and it moved about and appeared, from all appearances, to be human. But one of the, I don't know if we could say requirement, but probably requirement, is that whoever, and these people that had this ability or have this ability were known as the Lord God or the Lord gods. I like to think of that as Lord or lowered, so they were lower gods. And the ones that they created became known as the sons of God. But one of the requirements was that whoever created, let us say, life in this fashion, was responsible for that life, was responsible to look over and watch over that life. And I would say that probably would include loving instruction and teaching of truth, teaching of discipline, everything that a higher degree human would need to be a high, caliber human. So I found that very interesting and fascinating. And this kind of has sort of confirmed what I've been kind of getting and sensing, intuiting about God, let us say the big God or the absolute, not being the hands-on. See, we put the absolute in a human form, and we give the absolute human characteristics. And that's where we mess up. And that's where religion has messed us up. Because the absolute is not in human form and doesn't really have, not that it's void of human characteristics, but it's so far beyond human form and human characteristics and all that it's really incomprehensible until you even get your consciousness to a certain level. You can't even begin to understand the absolute. So for all these humans that are in lowered states of consciousness, That's all they can do, is just try to put God into human form and give him human characteristics and traits, right? But that's that's an error to do so. You're an error to do that. So God, or the absolute, didn't hands-on create humans, but we manifested. And so from this Atlantean teaching that I'm telling you about, it says that they manifested into physical form. And see, that's what I've been saying, that we manifested, that we were not created, as it were, by some human like God, until we get to that level that I just explained after, where the Lord gods, or the lower gods, had the ability to create life and give life to a created form. And I would say we probably can still do this. I mean, this monk that did this with this clay is in fairly recent times. So there you go. But again, we've been so lowered in our consciousness, and so separated from the absolute, that we think something like that is fantastical and crazy talk. But there's so much that's been hidden, not hidden only because, again, because of our consciousness. If our consciousness could miraculously, you know, raise 5 bars, 5 measures, we would instantly perceive so many things that we could have perceived at any time, but just did not have the capacity to do so because of the state of consciousness we were at. That's why it is imperative that we continually raise our conscious levels, raise our levels of consciousness. And it's not so much through knowledge. Yes, knowledge is a part of it, but you could have all the knowledge in the world and still not have it. Meaning, have the peace, or have the knowing, or have the purpose. And again, the ultimate, divine purpose is love, or we could say to love unselfishly. Because plenty of people could think that they're loving, but still be doing it from selfish motive. Example, a man falls in love with a woman, or a woman falls in love with the man. They really like each other. Then it goes beyond like to love, and they say they love each other. But what is really in their heart is selfish motive. I need to get a spouse. I need to find somebody I can have sex with. I need to have somebody I can have security in. I need to find somebody I can make children with. I need to find somebody, or have somebody, that I can make a family with, and all these things, right? But is that truly love? So we must take this notion of love to the fullest level, and that is unselfish love. Well, that's a whole different thing. That's a whole different topic, because that eliminates everything that would be tied to love, that would have a selfish motive. So it's not always about getting more knowledge and acquiring more knowledge, because we're just filling our brains, our intellects, full of data, 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 data. And I'm not saying it's bad to put data into the brain, but if that's all that it is, you could become, let us say, as wise and rich as Solomon, but still not have the capacity, or still not have the realization that you are still not at that place within yourself where you abide and exist in love unselfishly, or unselfish love, where you're completely pure with all your motives, all your thoughts, all your actions, all your desires. So purity, right? And there's so much impurity in everything, in everything. And I would say, again, part of the matrix. So the religions of the matrix, the politics of the matrix, the schools of the matrix, the career paths of the matrix, everything associated with the matrix is rooted in impurity or selfish motive and desire, including love. Not all love, but certainly some of it. So we have to realize there's yet higher there's a higher place for us. So, and I've been meditating, and that is doing something, right? Because I'm like, what can we do? We can just talk, right? Endlessly. We could read books endlessly. We could search endlessly. We could discuss endlessly. But what do we really do to facilitate this? And firstly, you have to have the desire. See, if you don't have the desire, then there's nothing anybody can do, including yourself. You have to have the desire. And the desire has to be greater than all your other desires, or let us say all your selfish desires. So what do we do? What action should be taken, or what action can we take? Well, that's precisely why I've been making, at least my last two videos have been meditation videos. And I kind of perceive that people are not as interested in that, because they would rather have knowledge, they would rather have data, they would rather have information, they would rather use the intellect. And there's a time and a place for this. But meditation and or techniques, yoga techniques, what have you, these are the things that actually work on your inner being, not your mind, not your intellect, not your data receiving storehouse, but the etheric body. Because again, we're dealing with vibrations that create or produce manifestations. And every single thing that we're seeing that is in physicality is the direct result of a frequency or vibration, and is merely a manifestation of that, including ourselves and our bodies. Right? So if we can work on that internal resonator, or the thing within that's produces these frequencies and vibrations that have this profound effect on the external realm, which again we may still not even believe much in or know much about or be very experienced with. But again, I'm trying to get us back to what do we do? What can we do? And so these are the things that we can do, right? Is we can learn to meditate. Everybody, I think a lot of people think they understand what meditation is, and there's many forms of it, and it's not just some simple thing that it is easily overlooked or not fully realized of what it is and what it does. The same with, the techniques, yoga technique, all the any techniques, right? But again, these are all designed and bring about the results of what it is we, the seekers, or we, the children of the law of one, want. This is our desire. We desire to get back home. We desire to manifest heaven here on earth whilst we're here. If we're going to be here, we may as well have it be heavenly, right? We might as well learn our gifts and then begin to use these gifts. And again, if these gifts are used in a selfish way, you may not get the gifts. Or if your intent or desire would be to use them in a selfish way, you may not manifest them. So the gifts have to be in line with, again, this purity that I'm talking about, where it's for the good of everybody, because we're coming more and more to realize that all is one, and that other is self and self is other. So that's why I've been kind of embarking on some meditation videos. And my next video after this is going to be a chanting video that is intended and designed to purify the chakras. And that would be a great place to start, especially if we're still a novice. I think many of us are still at that level, and that's fine. You're at whatever level you're at, doesn't matter. But what matters is, are you growing, are you progressing, and do you know what to do to progress, to grow, and not just fill your intellect full of knowledge. See, wisdom goes beyond the intellect. Fill yourself with wisdom. Well, how do I do that? Where do I find wisdom? How do I make my vessel a receiver for wisdom? And part of that is purity, desire, moving to the heart from the head. And so at first, some of these practices may seem like, I don't know. You might have that feeling about it, or it's easily overlooked, or the nugget of gold that is in there is easily missed. We either take it for granted, or we just have some opinion about it that's hindering our own ability to get that nugget and add that nugget to the basket of the heart, the wisdom, right? So that'll be my next video, chanting to purify the chakras And that's just one, you know, uh, method or one technique or exercise. And I hope to in the future, especially as this stuff keeps coming to me and I keep expanding my consciousness, because I don't ever let this rest. I don't ever take a break. I feel like I'm way behind where I want to be. And so I'm just driven and determined to find this purity, to regain these gifts, and to ultimately find my way home. But again, I'm not just wanting to do this just for me in a selfish way. I want to help everybody here to do so. And again, everybody that's reincarnated here, if you were an ascended master or what have you, the only reason that they came back here is for that very purpose. Because again, they didn't have to. None of them had to. They could have just let those first Manimals go and just said, well, they effed up bad, they really screwed up. And there the earth is, with the Manimals on it, and whatever happens will happen. Well, that probably would have ended in destruction at some point. And even though there's been intervention, it still sometimes seems like the damn thing might end in destruction. But the children of the law of one have not given up. And all of the great saints and masters have not given up and won't give up, I don't think. Why would they? As long as they're still here. Then none of us are going to give up, because there's still hope, right? If the sun is still shining and the plants are still growing and the animals are still frolicking and the birds are still singing and the frogs are still croaking, then that's telling us that there's hope. Don't give up. Don't give up. I know it looks bad sometimes. I know it seems crappy sometimes. I know it seems like these devious people that have gotten the reins of power, and they use all devious manner and wickedness to maintain that power. Don't give up, because our power ultimately is undefeatable. We have the ultimate power. We have the most high power. But again, we've all been lowered in consciousness, and just to come into physicality requires, for whatever reason, it requires this drop into density, which has a corresponding drop in consciousness. But we can get it back. We can remember, and we can do techniques, and we can, jack out of the matrix. That's the very first thing a person needs to do, is get your mind out of that matrix. Distraction and illusion, or Maya. So, love and light, my friends, as always. I will be looking forward to chant with you. And join, don't just watch that video. That's one. Again, I want to come up with things that are a little more interactive, because again, I want us to do something, or at least have the option to do something. This is not just this big intellectual, spiritual, intellectual endeavor, right? Because we can have spiritual egos. What's a spiritual ego? It's a person that's filled with spirituality and has their ego still at the forefront. How do you know if this is you or not? Are you loving unselfishly in all your ways? So we don't want a fleshly, carnal ego, and we don't want a spiritual ego either. That's no better. Matter of fact, that's probably worse, because it would allow us to stay deceived to the fact that we were still quite lost, even though we were full of all this spirituality or religion. Isn't that what the Pharisees were? And see, we don't think that the Pharisees were just in Jesus's time. We may just call them something different now, or we may not even recognize Pharisees right now in modern times. So I will see you on the next one, my friends. Continue to grow in grace, purity, and love.